Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty scary, and honestly, it's changing the game when it comes to global security. We're talking about the rise of the hybrid state, a world where it's getting harder and harder to tell where the government ends and organized crime begins.
So to kick things off, let's start with a bit of a puzzle. What in the world could possibly connect Russian spies, a really violent prison gang from Venezuela, and the fentanyl crisis that's hitting so many communities? I mean, on the surface, those things sound completely random, right? But stick with me, because the answer reveals this really dangerous new reality about how power and crime work together now.
And that connection is a whole new beast of a criminal group, the Transnational Criminal Organization, or TCO. And look, you gotta forget the old-school idea of cartels. We're talking about incredibly sophisticated global operations that act more like shadow governments. They're not just breaking the law anymore. They're basically writing their own rules, controlling huge chunks of territory and swinging elections. It's a whole new kind of power. And because of this, the whole game has changed. What we're seeing now is this weird kind of hybrid warfare, where countries are actually using these criminal networks as tools, as proxies they can deny knowing anything about. It's a sneaky way to wage war without ever having to declare it, just achieving their goals from the shadows.
Okay, check this out. Russian intelligence is literally using the Telegram app to hire people in Latin America for sabotage jobs in Europe. You might ask why. Well, it's because they're cheap, they're seen as disposable, and they can cross borders without anyone blinking an eye. For Russia, it is the absolute perfect way to mess with countries supporting Ukraine, all while being able to say, hey, it wasn't us. It's a shadow war fought with burner phones and, criminals for hire.
But this isn't just about big countries playing geopolitical chess. Let's zoom in on probably the most powerful and frankly terrifying example of this whole phenomenon, a Venezuelan prison gang that has mushroomed into a massive threat across the hemisphere. They're called Tren de Aragua. The way Tren de Aragua started is it's wild. They weren't born on the streets. They started inside a prison. And they didn't just escape from it, they took it over. They controlled it, turning the prison into their corporate headquarters, all with a quiet nod from the Venezuelan government. This timeline just shows their insane and horrifying rise to power. Starting in that prison, they then took advantage of this government policy called peace zones, which were basically police-free zones to build their empire. And now they've spread across the entire continent and are even being used as international hitmen for the Venezuelan state. So how did they get so big so fast? Well, they exploited a complete human catastrophe. The total collapse of Venezuela has forced over 7.7 million people to just flee the country. And that created this massive, desperate population of migrants who became the perfect prey for a group like this. And this is the really dark part. This is how they turned that tragedy into a business model. Tren de Aragua took control of these super dangerous migrant routes, like the Darien Gap. They became the gatekeepers, and they started extorting, robbing, and kidnapping the very people who were just trying to escape to a better life. They've built a continental human trafficking empire on the backs of this crisis.
But here's the thing. Tren de Aragua isn't some weird, one-off thing. They are the terrifying poster child for a much bigger trend that we're seeing all across the region. And that is the rise of the hybrid state, where governments themselves start acting like the mafia. Let's look at Peru for a second. The president there has an approval rating in the single digits. So you'd think she'd be out, right? Nope, she's untouchable. And why is that? Because she has a deal with a Congress where dozens and dozens of its members are under criminal investigation. It's a simple arrangement. They protect her, and she makes sure they stay above the law. It's basically a government of, by, and for criminals.
Over in Mexico, the problem is so baked in that experts have a term for it: the systematic co-option of the state. We're not just talking about a few crooked cops. We're talking about the complete capture of entire government institutions by these incredibly powerful criminal organizations. And this goes all the way to the very, very top. I mean, think about this for a second. Mexico's top security official, the guy whose entire job was to lead the war on drugs, was convicted in the U.S. of being on the Sinaloa cartel's payroll. The state wasn't just failing to stop crime, it was an active partner. And then you have Colombia, where a different road led to the exact same place. That historic peace deal in 2016 was supposed to finally bring stability, but instead, the government failed to secure the old rebel territories, and that created this huge power vacuum. And guess who filled it? New, even more ruthless criminal groups, leaving regular people with literally no one they can trust. So let's think about this. When the state and the criminals are partners, who is their biggest threat? It's not the police, it's the journalists, the ones who are brave enough to actually try and expose their secrets.
This slide really just shows you the human toll of telling the truth in these places. Across the entire region, journalists are being systematically targeted. They're getting hacked with military-grade spyware like Pegasus, they're being publicly smeared as criminals by their own governments, and many are forced to just flee for their lives. And what was their crime? Telling the truth.
This quote from Mexican journalist Marcela Turati, it just perfectly captures how twisted the priorities of a hybrid state are. They've got all the time and money in the world to illegally spy on reporters, but somehow they have zero resources to find the thousands of people who've gone missing. It just proves that for these regimes, the truth is way more dangerous than any crime.
And this merger of state and criminal power, it isn't just a regional headache. These new hybrid organizations are now the engine driving a truly global crisis.
Let's circle back to the fentanyl crisis. You see, this isn't just a drug problem. It's a global supply chain, and it's run by these TCOs that have protection from the state. The chemicals to make it come from China. They're cooked into fentanyl in Mexico by cartels who can basically do whatever they want, and then it's shipped into the US. This is what a globalized hybrid criminal enterprise looks like in action.
And these groups aren't just fighting each other anymore. They're forming strategic partnerships. We're seeing Mexican cartels teaming up with the Italian mafia to control the cocaine market in Europe. We're seeing Venezuelan gangs linking up with Brazilian prison gangs. They are operating like massive multinational corporations, building a global network to get as much profit and power as they possibly can.
Which really brings us to a final and honestly, a deeply unsettling question. When the state itself starts to act like a criminal organization, the whole idea of law and order just completely falls apart. And it forces us to ask this really fundamental question about what's next for global security. In a world full of these hybrid states, who is actually in charge?